grammatically transitioning from what he said. This is verse 6, so previous 5 verses. And based on everything I just gave you, now I'm going to tell you this. Now, one of the principles that I want you to take with you, this is extremely important, because the words, the messages, we call this the kerygma, meaning the preaching of the apostles. This is one of the functions, besides the fact that it's conveying the gospel, the person of Christ, the work of Christ. Please hear me say this. This is extremely important. One of the things that they're going to do, and that's where the therefore comes into place, because for 5 verses, we're about to read 5 verses. For 5 verses, he gave us something. He told us something. One thing that the Bible does not allow, God does not allow, is for us to continue to perpetuate the mindset of either individualism, autonomy, and even entitlement. This is what I'm trying to say. Verses 6 and following, which is what we're going to do today, we already looked at the previous verses. So if you miss any of this, I'd love for you guys to go back online and check it out. But he gave us the message, 1 through 5. Now he's about to give us what it means. And that's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. We don't get to define things. When God speaks, when God says something, he also tells us the meaning. So typically in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you find the stories of Jesus and the words of Jesus on those 4 Gospels. The remaining of the Bible, I'm going to argue, which is the epistles. Then you have a historical book by the name of Acts. But the remaining of the Bible is going to be the application, the implication, the contextualization. All that I'm trying to tell you is, I'm going to say it again. The people of God 2,000 years ago, churches like Corinth, they received Jesus. They became the church. They became the people of God, but they wanted to continue and perpetuate the mindset that they get to define what Jesus means, what God means. And all these meanings based on background, skin color, cultural preferences, whatever the case may be, which unavoidably we call that lenses. And we all have lenses. We see life through, who mama and grandmama was and where we're coming from and what happened in the previous marriage, whatever the case may be. Those things are unavoidable and they're part of who we are, but they're not authoritative. This is not This is not the real matter. The real matter is the only person who is inspired when it comes to study the Bible. And the only person inspired is precisely the author, which in this case is Paul. So the question is not what you think and what I kind of understand of the Bible. The question is, what does Paul think and what does he understand of what God has said? All that to say is because he's about to give us the meaning of the message. Now, before we get into the meaning, just briefly with me, and again, I don't have it on the screen, so please open your Bibles. This is chapter 5, same chapter, 2 Corinthians, beginning on verse 1. I'm going to read for us verse 1 through 5. So if you don't have a Bible, no worries. I'm going to read it for you. Here we go. For we know, now Paul is very optimistic and he assumes that we know. So hopefully we know, right? Hopefully we're not in ignorance. So for we know that if our earthly tent, he's speaking, looking at the body as a tent, right? He says, which is our house, is torn down. Now, the torn down is an understatement. Everybody's aging. I know we have a lot of teenagers here and young adults, and we were at graduation celebration. And when you're young, I remember when 50 was old. Now 51 is young. 50 is young. Anyways, it's just a matter who you ask. And Paul says, it's torn down. We have a building from God. So even though this house is going down, we have a building from God. A house, he says, not made by hands, eternal in the heavens. Number 2, verse 2. For indeed, just in case that you're wondering, you don't believe me, look at this. In this tent we groan. Is that true? Do we groan? Man, I get hurt by just stretching in the morning. I feel like I play a game or something. I'm just old. So in this tent we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven. Verse 3, since, in fact, after put it on this brand new clothing, we will not be found naked. For indeed, we who are in this tent groan, we're going through illness, we're going through aging, and eventually we died, so what is mortal will be swallowed up by life. Verse 5, now he, meaning Jesus, who prepared us for this very purpose is God. How did he prepare us? Glad you asked. Look at the end of the verse. He prepares by giving us the Spirit as a pledge. He's given us the down payment. It's basically God saying, hey, here is my guarantee. And the guarantee is not, here's what the guarantee is not. The guarantee is not that things are going to get better, although they can. The guarantee is not that you're going to have it your way, although sometimes God does things that, whatever he chooses to do. The guarantee is that I am reliable. That's the guarantee. That even though you may be shaken, even though you may be groaning, even though you may be going through the valley of the shadow of death, or maybe you're extremely successful and everything is just, cruising and God is being good to you and whatever. Bottom line, he says, hey, here is what I'm going to tell you. I have given you the Spirit as a pledge. So just briefly, the concept of the Spirit being given to you is the result not simply of the life of Jesus, of the death of Jesus. Watch this, please. Death of Jesus. He dies, he's buried, he resurrected, and then what happened after resurrection? Acts chapter 1, he went up to the heavens. What's my point? That there is no Spirit given to you unless we go through the entire Jesus experience. Does that make sense? I just want to give to you kind of the big picture of the conversation. Now, based on that, what does that mean? Well, this is what it means. Therefore, based on everything I just gave you, based on the down payment, I'm giving you the guarantee that I'm not promising you that things are going to get better. I'm promising you that what you're going to get at the end, regardless of what happens and how things unfold, you're going to get me. That's the point. So let me give you a little preview of what I mean by that. This year, we're going to celebrate 27 years, Arely and I, of marriage. And we are in a world, this is a beautiful world, where we have 8 billion people in the world, right? Tons and tons of people. I love marriage because marriage gives me access to the girl. Have you ever seen movies where you have to rescue the girl? Marriage is not about simply staying together, although it's important. Marriage is not simply just, procreation, although we have 3 kids. I think we've done well with that, and we're about to be grandparents. So now the legacy continues. Marriage, for me, is about the girl. It gives me access to the girl. What's my point? That out of the 8 billion people in the world, give me Arely. I don't know. Am I making sense? Anybody? Yes? With me? No? What's the point? The point is that we don't fight for marriage. We fight for the spouse. Because marriage, you can just build. The reason why I'm bringing the marriage component is because what we just read and what we're trying to say. What you get at the end is obviously the avoidance of hell. You will not go to hell if you're a follower of Jesus. It's obvious you're going to get heaven. And all of that is included, but ultimately, it's a person. That's what you get. Does that make sense? What you get is a person. What you get is Jesus. With that being said, think about it. Therefore, being everything I just gave to you, being always of good courage. He is speaking, Paul is speaking to a church that they still have not, it hasn't clicked yet between this temporary tent, this earthly body, and then what is to come. Now, I don't know if you struggle with this, because I do struggle with this sometimes as well. And last week, if you were with us, I gave you the testimony of the young lady that when we arrived to the valley 20 years ago, we walked into the furniture store, and once she found out that I was a pastor, she asked me, this young lady, 20 years ago, she said, hey, a couple of weeks ago, we had this huge fight between my father and I. The night that we had the fight, I left the house, and we had this humongous fight, and then he dies. So when she found out that I was a pastor, he said, can you help me connect with my dad? She's asking me to speak to a dead person because she wants to reconcile the relationship. Here's my point. If you're not careful when it comes to this component and trying to, the concept of courage, okay, is a concept that even though things are deteriorating, even though things may not be working the way you want, Paul just explained to us for 5 verses that you process the immediate, the reality, the brokenness, the craziness, even death through the ultimate. So for the Christian, death is not a cessation of life. It's simply a transition to eternity. Does that make sense? Now, here's my point. That if you're not careful, just like the lady from last week in the experience of the furniture store, when she's asking to help get connected with a dad, I think that's a legit concern. And I think that's no one is exempt to go through something like this. But here's my point. If you're not careful, especially in the unresolved tension of what is taking place right now and what is to come, this unresolved tension, potentially we can fall into the trap to believe or to think that the purpose of the gospel, the purpose of Jesus is just like this lady, is to give you internal peace. That even though you receive the doctor's diagnosis and you go through whatever you're going through financially, emotionally, relationally, then you seek the Lord so He can give you peace, and hopefully he can help you to fulfill whatever tasks, whatever goals you have. Now, again, those things are legit. I'm not criticizing anybody because I do the same thing, but that's not the point. See, the point, Paul is speaking, it says, being always of good courage, even though you are, what's the opposite of courage? Somebody, opposite of courage. Discourage? What's the opposite of, see, the concept is the concept of, what would be the opposite of determination? Hesitant? Lacking motivation? You have lost the drive? Now you're dependent on what others say and how you feel or what others think about you. See, the concept is of perseverance, which again, the opposite will be giving up, throwing up the towel. So Paul is finding a church that is struggling between what we just described, between the earthly component, your senses, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what you think, all of this, which is what makes us human. But then he says, the difference between Christianity and any other religion is that we're able to process the immediate, what's taking place, through the ultimate. And how you do this, once again, is through, listen to me for a second. You do it by taking doctrine, by taking what God says and put it into practice. And we call that resilience, perseverance. Now, this perseverance is very specific, is so you can magnify not necessarily your prayer life, although it's important that you pray, but you magnify the object of your prayer. Who are you praying to? In other words, this is not just faith for the sake of faith. And then look at this. This is the concept of servanthood. So the bottom line is that even though you may be discouraged, in your discouragement, you call upon the Lord. Because in my mind, I'm thinking of Job. Remember Job in the story in the Old Testament? If you haven't read or heard about Job, this is the guy that goes through misery. And one of the uniqueness about Job, that he goes through the deepest of sorrows, is that even though his theology wasn't really correct, even though he goes through unthinkable experience, one of the things about Job that really calls my attention is that he never stopped praying. He was always asking the Lord. And again, this is so crazy. If you notice the story of Job, at the end of the narrative, even though God restores everything back to him, what he has lost, God never answers all the prayers. And basically the message is this: God to Job, at the end, even though you're looking for answers and your sorrow and your grief is unthinkable, I'm better than answers. So I don't know where you are right now, because some of us, we have gone through some difficult scenarios. And again, we're asking. My point is that you need to keep on asking. Does that make sense? Keep on seeking the Lord. Do not quit. And then the seeking is so you can serve others. Bottom line is this, guys. Here we go. So the determination, the perseverance of the people of God, of the church, the perseverance of Christians, which again, in this time in history, apparently they were giving up. They were negotiating the gospel. They were compromising convictions. Please listen to me. Listen. Your perseverance and my determination is the overflow, is the result. Now, listen to the language, please, because I'm fixing to use two different words. One of the words is evidence, and the other word is result. You probably figure out by now that English is my second language. Really? Yeah. This accent, it takes a lot to work in this accent. Anyways, so here's my point. Because English is my second language, I'm 51. For the last 34 years, I have lived in the United States. I was 17 years of age when I came to America. What's the point? That Spanish is you should come and hear me speak in the first service. What's the point? That Spanish is what just is the result, is the overflow of who I am. English, I have to really work at it and practice more, because English is the evidence that I am a United States citizen, that I've been in the United States for 34 years now. So result, unavoidable, that's just who I am. Spanish comes natural. This word right here, your perseverance, is not the evidence that you're a Christian, is the result. Followers of Jesus, just like for me Spanish, you don't have a choice. You persevere. Am I making sense? Because if you look at it as an evidence, potentially you're going to say, hey, look at me. I went through the pandemic. I went through whatever. Look at my resilience. Look at what. No. This is not about you. It's not about how I can endure a thing. This is why. Because your perseverance is the result of the God who chooses to preserve you. So when you think of a refrigerator, you put things in there to be preserved. Otherwise, they will not last. So let me put it to you this way. When you look at a tripod, I really believe that salvation is the experience of three components. Number one, the first one, Paul says in Ephesians that we are saved by grace and grace alone. Implication that this is the gift of God, and this is what we call germination. This is where the seed is planted, and maybe it was planted through a sermon, through an experience, through whatever the case, mom, grandma, somebody spoke to you the gospel. And the Spirit of God took that message that was given and created newness of life. So this is when you are saved. Please listen to me. You are saved completely and you are saved instantly. The only thing that you contribute to this experience, the only thing you contribute is not your testimony, it's not how you used to be like this. No. What you contribute is shame, sin, and just blame, which we all have in common. Does that make sense? That's all that we contribute, just our sin. We confess our sin, we're forgiven, and Jesus. Now, when that happens, look at me, when that happens, the next step now is so you're not saved for a better life. You're saved that regardless of what life looks like, now every single experience from this point forward is created, is designed to magnify, to enlarge the character of God in your context, in your scenario. Now listen to me. I'm not implying that everything that happens, God approves it or He's okay with it. There's some things that should not happen. There's some things that are just negligence. There's some things that we're just affected by the brokenness of the world. But regardless, God is not limited to our sin. So when it comes to the perseverance, we persevere because that's the result of my first leg. Because I'm saved, it's like Spanish. It's just the natural. You don't have to force it. What's the point? Look at me. Here's the point. That if you don't persevere, potentially, it's not because you were weak or you were just confused or the grief was too much. If you lack perseverance, potentially it's because you were never saved. Does that make sense? So they go hand in hand. But there's a third one, and the third one is precisely what I just gave you. That if you are in this place and you're a follower of Jesus, or you were to choose to follow Christ today, with Christ, you begin with the end in mind. And the end in mind is precisely the God who chooses to preserve you. Not because things are better, not because you figure it out. You are preserved from the very beginning. You were saved by grace. You are sustained by grace. And then you get to the place of culmination, consummation of all things. And if you were to navigate this through the lenses of sin, this is where sin loses legal authority over you. What's the point? That before Christ, sin was something that you were legally bound and you had to sin. You have no choice. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you have to sin. When you are a follower of Christ, now you sin because you want to instead of because you have to. The second leg, which is again the perseverance, this is the legal component of sin. Now, the second leg is the component of influence of sin. This is where you and I are today as Christians, because now there's a struggle, right? There's something like, man, I know I should, but then, I kind of doubt. And now, the third one is finally that experience where Paul just read to us, or just spoke to us, verses 1 through 5, where now you're seeing life, you're seeing your experiences through what is to come. So this is the ultimate. This is where sin disappears. This is when you die, you go to heaven, and for the first time, no more sorrow, no more cry, no more illness. Does that make sense? So all that I'm trying to tell you is that this entire experience is the result of what you just read at the end of verse 5. At the end of verse 5 that we just read, God said, the way that you're going to find encouragement is because I have given you a down payment. And what was the down payment? The Spirit of God. So the Spirit seals you, the Spirit fills you, and the Spirit completes the work. Now, I don't know if this excites you or gets you in a better mood for this week, but have you noticed that this is all about God? This is not about you. So this is why I want to make sure very, very clear, this is not a choice. We have to continue. Quitting is not an option. Are you tracking with me? Listen to me. But the reason why it's not an option is because the God who has chosen to save you, He has chosen also to preserve you. And the way He preserves you, listen, the way He preserves you is through your perseverance. So which one is it? Is it God or is it us? And the answer is yes. The answer is both. Is the dichotomy, the both end of the... Am I making sense? Is this helping anybody? This is extremely important to me because look what he says next. So now, you got to be in good courage, not because things are going to change or get better. It's because you're able to see, once again, you see the immediate through the ultimate and knowing. Now watch this, listen to me. You got to know. So this is just beyond emotionalism. This is just beyond somebody told me. You are convicted. You know because you have experienced this. You know that while we are, where are we? See, right now we're home. Right now we are in the body which is deteriorating. This is the body that is aging. While we are in this body, in this home, says we are simultaneously, by default, we're absent from the Lord. What's the point? That once again, see, if you don't see the difference between where we are today and what is to come, and I go back to this, okay? If you don't see this, you potentially are you're gonna, what's the word? Potentially, you're going to set up yourself for a misconception that the concept of the prosperity gospel, anybody? You know what I'm talking about, prosperity gospel? This is the kind of a name it, claim it theology that if you said in the name of Jesus, it's going to happen to you. Listen to me for a second. The problem with the prosperity gospel, well, there's a lot of problems with it, but the problem is that they don't make a distinction between the now and what is to come. So a lot of these preachers and a lot of these churches, they affirm things that are true, but they're only true after you die. And they're saying this is going to be true right now. And I'm here to tell you, there's some things that will not happen until you and I go to Jesus. Am I making sense? The question is, what do you do? Well, what do? You do the same thing that you did at the beginning. At the very beginning, what you did, at the very beginning, you place your trust, say it with me, you place your trust in Jesus. That's how you got saved. If you were to be saved today, it's by you don't place your trust in trust. You don't place your trust in you. You don't place your trust in a better, that's positive thinking. The gospel is exclusively the reliability, the trustworthiness of one single individual, and that is not you. It's obviously not me. It's Jesus of Nazareth. So what do you do in this kind of an unresolved tension that we are right here, we're right now, but then there's something to come. Well, here's what we know. See, the bottom line is that you need to know who He is. And again, I'm going back to this young lady back 20 years ago that she wanted to get peace with herself by talking to the dad, remember? I think that's a legit deal. But this is not about peace within you. This is about Him. Do you know Him? Because if you were to know God, you're going to know you. And guess what? Watch this, because doctrine is always relational. If you know who you are based on who He is, then you're going to know what to do. Tragically, this church of Corinth, they believe in this in the opposite direction, which I believe is where we are today. What this lady asked me to do 20 years ago was exactly this in the opposite direction. She didn't really care about God, and she was obviously confused, but she wanted help on what to do. She knew that she needed to talk to the dead and reconcile the relationship. But it's pretty obvious, in God's economy, you should not talk to dead people. Does that make sense? Because you got to begin not with your need, you begin with who He is. Now, I know you want to get married. I know you used to be married. Whatever the case may be, whatever you are financially, emotionally, sexually, whatever the case you are, please do not begin with you, because you are the number one threat to your own life. I don't know if you agree with me on that. But if you leave it up to me, man, I need to be saved not only from the holiness of God, I need salvation from eternal damnation, which is hell, but I also need salvation from self. Because typically, I am the one that causes most of the sorrow and the grief. So in this case, I want you to follow this because Paul is making the distinction between the fact that we are home and we're absent from the Lord. So even though I am home, and even though maybe from a physical, emotional stability, from a security, it's not really working out, I recognize that my current reality is processed through the reality that is to come. So we're absent right now, but eventually we get to see Him. Now, this is what I'm trying to tell you. In the immediate, I'm home. But in the ultimate, look at me. It's not that we're going to get a better home. The ultimate is that we get to meet the owner of the home. Huh? Anybody? If you were to open the book of Hebrews, don't do it right now, but if you go to the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, this is how Hebrews begins. It says, God has spoken through the ages, through the prophets, but today he's speaking through the Son. What's the point? That when you look at the Bible, in the Bible, prophets is anybody who wrote the Bible in the Old Testament. Anybody, Moses is a prophet. And the point is that Moses was a catalyst of building the house of God, the people of God, the nation of Israel. But then the writer of Hebrews is saying, yeah, thank you, Moses. But you know who's among us? You know who came and dwelt among us? Not the one who builds the house. The one who came is the owner of the house. And you get to participate now because you're co-laborers with Jesus Christ. So that's kind of the perspective that's helping us. Now, here's the bottom line. And again, after this explanation, Paul goes back to the basics. What's the basics? Here's the basics. Verse 7, for we, not you, not I. This is the corporality of the gospel. We as a church, we walk. This concept of walking is lifestyle. It's not just what we believe, although we need to know what we believe, but it's how belief is translated into decision making. Conviction, doctrine is translated into worldviews. How do you make decisions? We walk. Come on, say it. How do we walk? I know we're not doing it. I know they're not doing it. But Paul, because he's very optimistic, and he's basing, I'm going to say it again. Paul is basing the narrative. He's speaking not on who the church is or how the church needs to be. See, Paul always speaks from the perspective of who God is. And based on what God says, the church is. Based on what God does, the church operates. Are you tracking what I'm saying? Because if if I begin with my needs and my requests, then I'm going to create what is called deism. Then I'm going to create the version that is convenient to me, to my need. See, Paul is basically saying, hey, we walk by faith, which implies this is the result. What he creates, we do this, so he takes care of the tendency that we all have, which is walking by sight, which is not working, is not helping. See, this is what we call occasional letters, because the church is basically doing the opposite. And that's why he's writing. He looks at the church and says, you guys have been walking by sight, and you struggle to what I'm saying because, look at this. This right here, you compromise this. Instead of trusting in God, you're trusting in what you see. Instead of trusting in what God has said, you're trusting in what you believe about God. I'm going to say it again. See, one thing is for you to believe in God, but it's very different for you to believe God. One thing is for you to have a profession or make a profession of faith. It's very different if you possess that faith. Am I making sense? Those are two different things. And a lot of us, we have simply settled to create a God that allows me to do what I need to do. So the occasion for this letter, this is the occasion, that the church is struggling to see this as the two sides of the same coin. This is my message. We're fixing to go, and this is my message today. Paul is basically saying we have to walk by faith. We don't walk by sight. What's the point? Listen to me. That faith is a prerequisite, it's a requirement. This is what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10, that he says we're saved by faith we're saved by grace through faith. I'm going to say it again. We're saved by grace, meaning that God gives it voluntarily. You cannot demand it or expect it. See, God gives it in a freely manner, out of his love, that grace, and you're saved through faith. And I said this before. Faith is like the ground on electrical system. Electrical system, you got positive and you got, what's the other one? Negative. And electricity is lethal. The ground, what it does, it regulates and makes the lethalness of electricity, makes it beneficial. So when you trust, you're basically saying what God has chosen to reveal of himself is enough for me to believe that he is who he says he is. Meaning, translation, when you live by sight is the concept that I will believe in you if you do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't do what I'm asking you to do or what I'm expecting to do, I'm going to try someone else. Are you tracking what I'm saying? See, that's faith in faith. See, the faith that we're describing is the ability to recognize that the Bible is a special revelation. God revealed himself through the Bible. That Jesus is the supreme revelation. So Jesus came to this world and Jesus lived a perfect life. Jesus Jesus wasn't a rabbi. He was not a rabbi preaching about God. Jesus is God who was preaching to us. And the reason why he had to be God is because Jesus qualified, because of his perfection, the perfect life that he lived, he qualified to absorb, he qualified to receive, going back to the analogy of electricity, this overcharging, this supernatural electrical shock that took him to the cross and eventually died. He died for you. He died for me. So now we are allowed to believe. But once again, please listen to me. If or since you have believed, it must be translated into how and you and I live. This is why what you believe is always relational. And that's why faith is translated into faithfulness. I gave you the tripod a while ago, and I spoke to you of the grace of God, which is the first one. That's how you are justified. That's how germination takes place. You are saved by grace. And then I spoke to you of the perseverance. And I told you that perseverance is not the evidence, but is the, like Spanish for me, is the result, right? Two different things. But then I spoke to you of the God who chooses to preserve. He preserves, and that's why you persevere. When we speak of faithfulness, please look at me. This is not your faithfulness and my faithfulness. This is the faithfulness of one single person, that in the hour of need, in the moment of despair, betrayal, and abandonment, he remained faithful. And his faithfulness was precisely for us. It was a missionary faithfulness. He was faithful. So when you and I start living by sight and we get discouraged, when you and I lose track of what is to come, of the ultimate, he remains, what is it? Faithful. When you and I stumble, and Lord have mercy, do we do that? When you and I go through the valley of the shadow and death, whether it's self-inflicted or somebody else creates it, he remains faithful. When you and I are unfaithful, he is faithful. So what does that mean? I'm so glad you asked. This is what it means. Jesus was born. Jesus lived for 33 years. He went to the cross. He was placed on the ground for 3 days. On the third day, he rose again. He walked among the people for 40 days. And after 40 days, he went up to the Father. And literally, he is standing. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us with his faithfulness. So when God sees your unfaithfulness and my brokenness and my lack of confidence, he sees us through the faithfulness of Jesus, that he sees us. He looks at your life and looks at my life. He looks at my family and my kids, and he looks at the church of Jesus Christ in all of the imperfection through the faithfulness of Jesus, that he never says, okay, that's one. Well, I told you not to do it again. Here you go again. No, he looks at you through the perfection of Jesus. So today, this is the down payment. Today, you have been fully saved if you know Christ. Today, you are fully redeemed. Today, nothing can separate you from the love of God. Absolutely nothing. Regardless of what happens, who goes, who comes, how things enter. But listen to me. If this is true, then now you don't have a choice. You persevere. Does that make sense? Because the perseverance is the assurance that everything that we just said is true. So which one is it? And the answer is yes. So the faithfulness of Jesus was given to you. The faithfulness of Jesus was given to the church. And we exercise, we remain, and we persevere because he persevered, and his perseverance now is ours. So this is a matter of stewardship. This is not a matter of simply determination and just kind of a, hey, we can do this together. No, this is simply receiving what was given freely. Jesus entrusted that to the church and says, you take my faithfulness, you proclaim the gospel against all odds. This is going to cost you your life. It's going to cost everything within you. But trust me, when you fight, when you are faithful not towards victory, but from victory. It's what has been done that you get to operate. It's what has been done, and it's unchangeable because it's history. Now you move and you start processing the immediate through the ultimate. Is this making sense? Is the faithfulness of God making sense? I don't have any other message for you. I don't have anything else to give you, because I know you have been unfaithful. I'm sure unfaithful, but He is faithful. And we rest. We literally place our trust in the fact that He is trustworthy, that He is reliable, and we can enjoy His presence today.